So, as we know, things have rapidly been changing in our world and around us. It is quite an honor to have the Rotary International General Secretary and CEO, John Hewko, join us today. It's also a pleasure to have our International Director, our very own Jeffrey Cadorette, join us as well. They're going to have a discussion, facilitated discussion about leading Rotary in rapidly changing times. I'm going to stop sharing the screen now. What we ask you to do again is please put it in speaker view so that you can see John and Jeff back and forth talking. We're going to try to get to the questions the best we can due to the time constraints here with John Hewko joining us. So please be patient, and if we can't get your question answered after their discussion is done, we will gladly take care of that and reach out to John and Jeff for you and try to get the answers to your question. So with that, Jeff, John, welcome. Please.
Thank you, Kevin. Hi, John. How are you?
Jeffrey, good to see you. I haven't talked to you in like 12 hours.
Seems like just yesterday.
Yeah.
John just came from an event in Puerto Rico, the miracle of virtual connectivity. It really is a privilege for each of us to be here with you today in District 7450. Always good to be in my home district. Great to see so many familiar faces on the call. I just wanted to give you some background on John, and he'll kill me for doing this, but we are so fortunate to have this man as the CEO and General Secretary of Rotary International and the Rotary Foundation. And I just want to give you a little background. He's been with us since 2011, and I think I got that date, that year right, John. From 2004 to 2009, John was Vice President for Operations and Compact Development for the Millennium Challenge Corporation, a U.S. government agency established in 2004 to deliver foreign assistance to the world's poorest countries. Prior to joining MCC, John was an international partner with the law firm of Baker and McKenzie, specializing in international corporate transactions in emerging markets. And he helped establish the firm's office and was the managing partner of its offices in Kiev and Prague. While working in Ukraine in the early 90s, John assisted the working group that prepared the initial draft of the new Ukrainian post-Soviet constitution and was a charter member of the first Rotary Club in Kiev. He has been a public policy scholar at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars, an adjunct professor of law at Georgetown University, and a visiting scholar at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. Published numerous papers. He holds a law degree from Harvard University. That's a small college up in Cambridge, I believe. A master's in modern history from Oxford University, where he studied as a Marshall Scholar, and a bachelor's in government and Soviet studies from Hamilton College. As our CEO and General Secretary, he oversees a staff of over 700 at our world headquarters at One Rotary Center, excuse me, in Evanston, and at our 7 international offices around the world. He and his wife, Marga, are major donors to the foundation, and they live in Evanston. We are so fortunate as an organization to have this impressive man. It's been my privilege and pleasure to get to know him over the past 2.5 years. And we've become friends. And so, John, welcome to District 7450.
Oh, great, Jeffrey. Thanks so much for that overly generous introduction. And I also do want to recognize that the District 7450 is very fortunate to have Jeffrey as your director representing you on the Rotary International Board. He's done just a really outstanding job, a true voice for change, for taking our organization in a new direction. So I've really enjoyed working with Jeffrey the last 2 years, and I will be very sad to see him go. But again, thank you, Jeffrey, for just a great 2-year working relationship, and I look forward to continuing that when you chair the Communications Committee next year, as well as the Pandemic Response Task Force. So look forward to our continuing engagement. I guess perhaps what I could do before we continue our conversation with Jeffrey is to perhaps take a few minutes to give you just a snapshot of what's happening today in Rotary from a global perspective. And then perhaps, Jeffrey, we can get into the kind of the dialogue going forward. You know, back as Jeffrey mentioned, one of my primary responsibilities as your general secretary is to oversee the Rotary professional staff. And we have about 750 professionals working at Rotary, 550 in Evanston in our headquarters, and then another 200 some in our offices outside of North America. And it became very clear to me back in January that this pandemic was going to sort of sweep the globe, and the Rotary and the Secretariat would need to move to sort of this online new virtual reality. And so we established a task force in January. It took the months of January and February to kind of get ready for this, make sure we were prepared to sort of move to a virtual work environment. I sent everybody home, the entire Secretariat around the globe, home for one day to do a trial run. What it would be like to work in a virtual environment. And I'm glad we did, because we were able to get a lot of the kinks out of the system. And on March 12th, we went to full work at home status, as did most of the Rotary world. And I must tell you that that transition was fairly seamless. And today, as I speak, I think the Secretariat continues to support you, the Rotarians around the world, as we did before the crisis began. In fact, I would say that we're actually doing more now, because we have to revamp a lot of what we do to take into account the new reality that we are living. So first point, operationally, Rotary, as I speak, is sound. Secondly, a lot of questions about what's going to happen to our membership going forward in these very difficult times that we're now living through. And I'd like to sort of manage by data, not by anecdote. And we're very fortunate to have on staff a PhD statistician. And so I asked him to look at the last 115 years of Rotary history and say what did happen to our membership, globally at least, in all the various crises that the world has faced over the last 115 years. And then using sophisticated mathematical modeling, what would be our prediction going forward in terms of this crisis. And what's interesting is that if you look back at our 115-year history, there was only one year, when we saw a significant drop in membership. And that was 2 years after the end of the Great Depression here in the States. And that drop was a little over 5%. In all the other crises that the world's gone through, Rotary membership has fallen to the extent it's fallen, and in some cases it paradoxically increased. It's fallen by less than 2%. And in the last crisis of 07-08, membership fell by less than 1%. We have to remember that a 1% fall in membership represents an $800,000 loss in revenue. And so even if we were to experience a 5% drop, which has only happened once in our history, that represents a loss of $4 million in revenue to Rotary International. And fortunately, Rotary leaders through the years have been very prudent with our money. We have adequate reserves to cover these types of membership shortfalls. And so, in my view, at least currently, as I speak, not only are we operationally sound, but we're also very, very financially sound. And in terms of predictions going forward, if we take 115 years worth of data, model it out, with 95% probability, membership will fluctuate in a range of plus 2% or minus 2%. And so that's really the range of probability that we're talking about. And as I said, we have more than adequate reserves to cover that sort of shortfall. So operationally, we're strong, and financially, we're strong. What's been Rotary's response globally to the COVID disaster that we're now currently living through? Well, the trustees of the foundation established a disaster response fund of $3 million. That was supplemented by another 2-point-something million of additional contributions from Rotarians. So we have a fund of over $5 million. Each district was able to apply for a COVID disaster response grant of up to $25,000. More than 320 districts have applied. Unfortunately, we don't have enough money to satisfy the full demands, but that $5.2 million has already been fully dispersed. And as more money comes in, we'll then try to meet the remaining district requests. Global grants, we've also received over $14 million in global grant requests that are COVID related. So if you take global grants and the disaster response grants that we've issued, Rotary has put out almost $19 million worth of disaster response funding in the last couple of months. And that's not even taking into account, that's an impressive number in and of itself, but that doesn't even take into account all the tremendous work that's happening at the district level, at the club levels, all over the world. It's just been extraordinary. As I travel the Rotary world virtually, and I'm sure, Jeffrey, you have the same reaction, it's just astounding what Rotarians have been doing. So I think all of us as Rotarians can be extremely, extremely proud of what our organization has done in terms of responding to COVID. Polio, a lot of questions on polio. What are we going to do? What's happening with the polio eradication effort? Well, unfortunately, we've had to suspend the door-to-door vaccinations because of obviously the social distancing norms. However, we continue to do all the surveillance work and all the other ancillary work surrounding the polio effort. And what's quite interesting is we're now repurposing the polio infrastructure to fight against COVID. Very similar to what we did a few years ago in West Africa with the Ebola crisis, where we were able to repurpose the polio infrastructure to stop the spread of Ebola, particularly in Nigeria. But having said that, we need to continue to raise money for polio. We have the 2-to-1 Gates match is still in effect, so we need to raise 50 million to get that 100 million match. Particularly since when we come out of this crisis, we will need to, in effect, redouble our efforts to kind of make up for lost ground due to the suspension in the vaccination campaigns now. So please, please continue with your generosity for the polio effort because we need to come out of this crisis even more ready, more prepared to carry out. Then finally, let me just close with one final point before we get to the conversation with Jeffrey. World is living through an extraordinarily difficult time, crisis. Our country now is living through a very difficult period. But I think very often when in difficulties, there are a few bright clouds, white clouds in that wall of dark clouds. There are silver linings. And I think that is what is happening with Rotary. This is an incredible opportunity for us to really change and rethink our organization. We've been trying for a long time to push the use of technology. A lot of resistance. Well, in one fell swoop, the entire Rotary world had to go virtual. And many people are finding, hey, there's a lot of positive in all of that. Of course, we all can't wait to get back to meeting physically. Humans need that. That's fundamental bedrock of Rotary. But this is an incredible opportunity for us to step back and rethink our organization, because at the end of the day, we're selling a product. And the product is the club experience. The experience you get by joining a Rotary club, and you pay for that experience with your time and your money. And in North America, we're seeing that people are either not buying our product, or when they buy it, they don't like it. We're seeing significant drops in membership in North America, Australia, UK, New Zealand. North American Rotarians make up 29% of Rotary today. It used to be 100 by definition. We're now down to 29% of overall worldwide membership, and rapidly dropping. And so we need to rethink our product and make it more attractive for the market we're trying to attract. And this gives us an excellent opportunity to do that this crisis. And so yes, we're in a difficult time, can't deny that, but this is an opportunity, a pivotal moment for us to kind of think out of the box, because we'll be forced to be creative and perhaps come up with new ideas, new ways of operating that will so that we can come out of this crisis even stronger than before. So I'll stop there and pass it back over to Jeffrey in terms of continuing the conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, John. And folks, if you have any questions, I mean, you can put them in chat, but there will be time. We'll have plenty of time for you to actually ask your question of John if you want, by raising your hand. If you go to the participants, or I guess it's the reactions button, whatever it is down there, you can raise your hand on the screen, or just raise your hand and Russ or Kevin will see it. John, so let's go back to 2 years ago. Barry Rassin was incoming president of Rotary International. And I forget what city we were in, somewhere in the world, but we asked the question of the board: if you invented Rotary today, would it look like it does now? And categorically from around the world, the answer was no. And then so the next logical question was, then what would it look like? And out of that came the Shaping Rotary's Future Committee. And that committee has been hard at work now for over 18 months. They're due to present to the board again in June. But they're looking at a lot of things, and talk to us about that. You're in the loop as to what that committee's looking at as far as flattening the organization, changing the structure and the governance. Share your thoughts on that with us, if you would.
Yeah, it's thanks, Jeffrey. It's really like it's in effect a whiteboarding exercise. If we were to organize Rotary today, again below the RI level, below the board of directors level, what would it look like? Would we have governors? Would we have districts? It was really just sort of taking a blank sheet of paper and thinking through what's the most effective way that which should be organized today. The committee's still working. I suspect that and sort of no ideas too crazy. They've been looking at a wide variety of opportunities. I don't want to prejudge what they're going to be proposing to the board and then later to the council on legislation. But what I do suspect is it'll probably be a two-phase process. A new structure will probably be piloted in a couple of select regions to see if it works. And then if it makes sense to expand that to the entire Rotary world, then we would then have to go we'd have to go to the council on legislation first to get the pilots sort of approved. And then I suspect go a second time to the council to get the overall structure approved. And so we're really talking at least 6 years before this thing fully gets laid out, given our governance requirements. But what I do suspect that whatever structure comes out of this, it will take into account the growing regionalization in Rotary. We're seeing that Rotary is kind of different in different parts of the world now. I mean, one thing that can never change is our values, our four-way test, the focus on ethics, fellowship, all that sort of stuff. Those are bedrock things that are never going to change. But structure, bureaucracy, how we operate, those aren't values. Those are just mechanisms by which we deliver our values. And there's growing differences in the Rotary world on those fronts. So however this new structure looks like, I suspect it will be focused on regionalization, devolving power down to regions or areas so that decisions can be made more quickly, more nimbly, so people can react to events as they're unfolding, and again, make our organization more effective, more nimble, more relevant, frankly.
Well, and to that point, one of the things that the committee looked at is one of the basic foundations of what we looked at was delivering to our participants, delivering resources and tools to our clubs and our members. We call it the Great Frozen Middle. I think someone estimated that there were 22 levels between the president of Rotary International and the club member. And in this new model, we've got it down to 4, because what we're seeing is that, and you heard Cecily talk about it earlier, you heard some of the members of your district talk about it. The staff at Rotary has some amazing tools available and resources, human and online. And the problem is that they sometimes have trouble getting down to the club. They either aren't pulled or they're pushed, but they're not pushed far enough. And so the basic tenet is to support you, the club members, and our participants better. And that's one of the principles that's been guiding that committee. And now, John, we had this pandemic thing happen. And by the way, congratulations to you, because you did lead the charge. You looked out for the staff. And I remember that one-day test, but you were ahead of the curve as far as getting our people home, working from home safe. They're working harder than ever now that we're in this new environment. And we are working at 100% capacity. And so congratulations to you for that. Talk to us about what it's like to lead an organization of 1.2 million members, but also 750 odd employees around the world. And where's your right hand in that, and your core staff in Evanston? What's it like to do that?
Well, in some ways, I don't want to be flippant here, but it's like being the master cat herder. You've got 1.2 million cats out there that you're trying to, Rotary clubs are autonomous, and and we're obviously 70% of our Rotarians are now outside of North America. We're truly a global international organization. The Secretariat, we work officially in 9 languages. We publish, Rotary magazines are published in I think 31 or 32 languages around the world. It truly is a global United Nations. And so it really requires a lot of coalition building, pulling together, at least on the governance part, pulling together diverse opinions. And we as an organization, we are designed really for for discontinuity, right? We're consciously designed that, right? Our president changes every year, half the board changes every year, governors change every year, club presidents change every year, a quarter of the trustees change every year. And a lot of the challenges that we face as an organization are going to require long-term strategic thinking and long-term continuous, consistent actions in a structure which by definition is somewhat discontinuous, and for good reason, right? You want to bring new people in every year, new blood, new ideas, and give everyone an opportunity, and many people an opportunity to serve. But it does make that kind of strategic continuous action much more difficult. And so I certainly view my job and that of the Secretariat as the kind of voice of continuity to really keep the ship moving in as straight a line as possible, given our governance structure, which incentivizes discontinuity. In fact, to that end, I would say, Jeffrey, you and I've talked about this quite a bit. Language matters, and I think we should ban use of words like my year, my theme, my governors, my club presidents, my agenda, because that was successful perhaps for the first 100 years of our history. That approach no longer works. It really needs to be, what is my role in year two? I'm club president in year two, or I'm governor in year two of my district or club's 5-year plan. What am I going to do to fulfill year number two's goals and objectives as part of this longer term process? And so one thing that's extremely important in my view is continuity between with the presidents, president-elects, nominees, work together as one united team. Same with the governor chain, to put together a strategic plan, and then you stick to it and you execute it, because the challenges we're facing are going to require that we do that. And again, we at the Secretariat are here to support you. We've got great staff, great resources, great professionals with a lot of experience. And so by all means, we're obviously here to support you. But I think fundamentally our role is that of maintaining continuity and ensuring that we're moving kind of straight versus, back and forth.
Thanks, John. Question came in on the chat line about contributions to the foundation. I mean, you talked about that statistical analysis you did. We received that report at our April board meeting. And one of the things that did take a hit in many of these crises were contributions to the Rotary Foundation. And of course, now Polio Plus in addition to that. The question is, given that all of our staff is working from home now, is RI behind in processing checks coming into the Rotary Foundation due to working at home? And if so, any idea if there's that backlog?
Yeah, I mean, we did have a slight backlog because obviously everybody was working from home. We have now brought back a very limited number of staff, and some of them were brought to process all the backlog in checks. But we have also seen a big uptake in the use of paying online and contributing online, particularly in many places outside the United States where there was a greater reluctance to do that. So again, this is one of those silver lining opportunities that's happening. On the broader question of fundraising, we're going to have a challenge, and every organization is going to have a challenge, because most of our fundraising activities require us getting together. They're events, walkathons, pancake days, bike rides, $1 million dinners. Well, in the short and medium term, that's not going to be possible. And so I have 6 calls to action to Rotarians. And one of them is, we really need to put our creative thinking caps on and figure out how we're going to fundraise in this new normal. For me, the gold standard is the kind of that ALS ice bucket challenge. And if you remember, everybody was dumping buckets of ice on each other and to raise money for ALS. And they raised about $300 million at a cost of nothing. So it's going to be our next ALS Ice Bucket Challenge. How are we going to continue to fundraise in these difficult environments? And we really need to unleash, in my view, the creativity of our 1.2 million members to come up with new ways to do it. And here's where our Rotaractors can help. Our Rotaractors, they live in this space, they're comfortable in this space, they're creative as heck. Let's use this opportunity not only to strengthen our ties with Rotaractors, but to use their capacity for creativity to help us think through issues like, how are we going to raise money when we're all sitting at home in lockdowns? It's a challenge. I don't have the magic answer, but I think putting our heads together, we will find ways to do it. I know one example, I had a similar meeting with this one with the Rotarians in Ukraine, and there's one club that raised a boatload of money doing a virtual beer fest. People buying and selling beer online. I think at the end of the day, somebody got a case of beer delivered to their home. Don't know if that works in 7450. Certainly worked in Ukraine. And then they're now expanding it out, and they're having a vodka fest. I just got the invitation for a vodka fest. They call it Horilka in Ukrainian. So there's a big Horilka fest, and they're trying to replicate it district-wide now. Very successful at the club level. So again, we need to be creative. It's going to be a challenge, Jeffrey, but I think we'll be up to it.
Thanks, John. And by the way, Cecily Smith, who's still on the line with us here. John, Cecily is one of our innovative club advocates. You know that we have 20 of those in North America, and we brought them to Evanston and trained them back in January. Cecily is one of those. She's on the line with us. She spoke to the group earlier. But Cecily also has a bit of a skill set in online fundraising. So for any of you on the call who want some advice on that, talk to Cecily. And Cecily, I'm going to ask you to unmute if you can, because
Sure.
you had a question. And so why don't you just go ahead and ask John?
No problem. So yes, if your district, first off, would like to talk about online virtual fundraising, please let me know, because I keep getting success stories every time I give the talk. So now we've got lots of great creative ideas to share. My question for John. I applaud Rotary's recent statement of solidarity for people protesting for racial justice that you guys issued last week, and its reaffirmation of Rotary's continued commitment to inclusion. However, what practical steps or programs is Rotary planning to help our clubs become more diverse and leadership to be more inclusive? Rotary does have things in the toolkit online, how to be a diverse club, how to, assess all of that. But as an organization, we also need to do the learning and have the uncomfortable conversations and reevaluate lots of things to make some real lasting change. So my question is, Rotary planning anything more deliberate than that statement to help? And I'm asking this as an ally of my friends who are kind of traumatized right now by what's been going on. And we have people in our community who are reaching out going, Black Rotarians and others who are just like, hey, what's Rotary going to do to help?
Oh, thank you, Seth. That's a great question. And you're right, we did put out that statement. We do have, as you mentioned, a number of tools available. There is a diversity, equity, inclusion statement that the board has adopted. There's a goal to have at least 30% female membership by, Jeffrey, remind me what the year is, if you remember off the top of your head.
Excuse me, 2022.
2022. And we are currently, to your point, developing additional communications that will be much more action-oriented, practically focused about what Rotarians can do. However, having said that, all of this is going to begin and end at the local level. It's people talking to people. It's Rotary clubs stepping up, grabbing this issue by the bull by the horns and making it happen. The real work happens at the club and at the district level and at the individual Rotarian level. And I'm hearing anecdotally of all kinds of and whatever the actual practical steps one winds up taking to help address this issue, it's going to have to involve dialogue. It's going to have to involve bringing people together to have these conversations, Cecily, these uncomfortable conversations, as you mentioned. And it's going to differ from, we're a global organization. 70% of our members are outside the United States. The dynamic on this issue in the US may be very different from other places. The issue is universal, but how it plays out and how it's dealt with is going to vary from country to country and from region to region. Even within the United States, there's going to be differing dynamics in different places. And so it does eventually come down to, what are you going to be doing at the club level? Not you, Cecily, but what you, generic you. What's going, and what are the steps that are going to be taken? I think whatever it is going to require that concept of dialogue and bringing together. And that's right in our wheelhouse. If you look at our history, if you look at what we've done historically in terms of bringing people together, goodwill and friendships, bridging continents, bridging divides, bringing people together, whether it's through our Peace Fellows, whether it's through our youth exchange program, our work with the United Nations, all of the work we do in our 6 areas of focus, which all lead to creating the conditions for peaceful harmonious societies, the extraordinary convening power we have, given our community roots, etc. I mean, in some ways, we are ideally placed as an organization to lead the charge in having this dialogue, in having these conversations, and bringing people closer together. So this is just the first step of many going forward.
Well, and John, you know that our Chief Strategy Officer, Tom Thorfison, one of my colleagues on the board, Stephanie Yurchek, and I had a conversation with Braver Angels yesterday, I think it was, might have been the day before. Braver Angels is an organization that helps people to learn how to listen rather than talk at each other. And they're developing some tools around this. And we're taking a look at that to see, is that something that clubs could use? Because clubs are connected into their community, into churches, into civic groups. And so is the Braver Angels model something that we could use to help clubs to start those conversations in their communities? So it's another thing that we're looking at. By the way, I just have to give this aside. John, you've been on like 8 million of these calls since March. I now have a bachelor's degree in the do's and don'ts of interior design. I just want to say that. And also, Christina, your cat that's sitting behind you is just the cutest thing I've ever seen. So I don't know how you get it to just stay there. And if is it for every Zoom call or just this one? Anyway, back to Cecily, did you have a follow-up comment? I heard you.
Yeah, well, one thought, you and Valerie will be getting the email from me about a zone DEI team that we've already got some people interested in. But is there something, and I know you guys can't answer this question now, but the concept of Rotary having some kind of small peace-related grant for districts that want to develop a diversity, equity, inclusion program, and maybe there are guidelines and maybe there are rules, but the idea of helping to get a really impactful speaker or helping to facilitate, we're trying to do our webinar for 500 people, but different ways that Rotary is saying, hey, we will help facilitate that communication, or really developing that list of, I know a number of people who are able to speak about diversity and inclusion and unconscious bias from my own personal network or from Rotarians or, Todd Jenkins. But maybe is there a list of speakers that Rotary can help put together who are willing to come to districts, just helping to provide more tools or funding or something to really help continue that conversation. I'm hoping our two zones can develop that framework of having impactful speakers to have the uncomfortable conversations, to do the learning, to then give Rotarians action steps for their clubs and community. But, the thought is there something Rotary can do behind the scenes to help districts do all this?
John, I'll take a shot at that. At the April board meeting, the Pandemic Response Task Force was developed, and the charge to that task force is to take a comprehensive look at the organization with a view toward optimizing virtual connectivity as we move out of this pandemic. Let's not just haphazardly, accidentally slide out of this. Let's intentionally pivot and take advantage of it. And so there's a report from that committee. They've met 4 times now, coming to the board in June. And one of the items is to develop a speakers bureau, because now that we have this ability, we can create this resource of speakers, and it could be in categories, Cecily, and one of them could be that, could be a DEI. I know on staff, John, there's a group of staff that are very tuned into DEI initiatives. Yeah, Cecily, I think that's something that we can do, something that we're intentional about doing as we move forward.
Oh, and again, that staff group is now working on, to your point, says putting together tools, webinars, resources for Rotarians in the DEI space.
So, John, and by the way, Russ, I'm going to depend on you now to kind of keep an eye in the chat box as we continue. We've got maybe 8 or 9 more minutes left here in our slot. John, when we were in, I forget whether it was Montreal or Niagara Falls, one of our zone events, and you and I were having a conversation on stage, and the question I asked you is, what keeps you awake at night? that may have changed now, but what are your top hits now on what keeps you awake at night relative to our organization?
That's yeah. I mean, I think it's somewhat changed, but I still think my answer would be the same as it was back then, Jeff. I think there's probably, I guess, what six things that kind of keep me up at night, and I guess the first is membership. We're seeing membership declines in North America. That concern has been amplified now that we've moved to this new virtual reality that we're living in. How will that affect membership? Will it would be a positive or negative effect? But we had, again, in North America, significant membership issues, and that's one thing that keeps me up. The other is, we're going to remain relevant. How do we remain relevant in the world today? Some of you may have heard Australian Rotarian Michael McQueen, who does a very nice presentation on organizations and the rise and fall of organizations, and he has what's called the relevance curve. And in a typical life cycle of an organization, you sort of rise up that relevance curve, you hit the top, and then you start sliding down. And there is a point of no return on that relevance curve where you're never going to come back. And the point is, are we at that point? And if we're not, how do we make sure we don't get to that point? And the classic example, of course, is Kodak, right? The world is moving digital. Kodak insisted on film. How do we market film better rather than moving to digital? They didn't realize they were in the memory business. They thought they were in the film business. The next thing you know, an iconic brand is gone. So, how do we ensure that we don't become the next Kodak? 3, are we going to be nimble enough? Are we going to be nimble enough to make the changes we need to do to adapt to the new reality? And before I had real concerns about that, our governance structure is pretty slow moving, right? I mean, it's like an aircraft carrier. Now, once it gets moving, you can't stop it, like polio, right? Once we get on it, it's like a juggernaut, but it's not a PT boat. And I think perhaps this new normal will kind of add some nimbleness to our the way we operate. 4th, continuity. I talked about that earlier. These challenges we face require continuity. And 5th, what's going to be our next global project? Once we eradicate polio, what are we going to do? How do we rally 1.2 million Rotarians with 1.4 million points of view around the next global initiative? And I think if we do have one, I believe we should. Polio put us on the map. And of course, they're making a tremendous difference for mankind. But if we do have a new project, I think it has to have 3 criteria. 1, it has to be something that all Rotarians can identify with. 125 countries had polio when we started this back in 1985. It was a real thing for almost every Rotarian. 2nd, you need to be able to have Rotarians participate beyond check writing. And the oral polio vaccine allowed hundreds and thousands of Rotarians to participate in vaccination campaigns. And when you do that, it gives you an emotional bond to the cause beyond just writing a check. And 3rd, there has to be a clear end game, clear measurable way to determine success. We're done. And that you can do in polio. We either have it or we don't. And so what's out there that kind of has those 3 characteristics that we can all rally around, that'll be our challenge. Maybe we'll have a project in each of our 6 areas of focus, or maybe we won't have one. But that's the 5th thing that kind of worry. What's going to be our next project, and how do we kind of gear ourselves up to that, while at the same time eradicating polio? And then finally, the growing regionalization of Rotary. Rotary, as I said earlier, is different in different parts of the world. And I think the organization is taking that on through this Shaping Rotary's Future Committee. And again, regionalization and the realization of regionalization will play a huge role in whatever new structure we come up with. So those are kind of 6 things that, among many others, that kind of keep me up at night.
And just to tag on to your corporate signature project, when we talk about that at the board and when the trustees talk about that, there's a line of people at the door wanting to be that next thing. And everybody's been very clear that we're not even going to have that conversation until polio is done. What we are doing now is developing the criteria and the objective by which that thing might be selected. And the other conversation is that, to John's point, should it be one project or should it be regionalized? Should there be a project in Africa that's different from a project in India or a project somewhere? So should there be 2 or 3 or 4 projects of that scope? That the new projects of scale and programs of scale of the Rotary Foundation may be helping us to take a look at what that might be. That's how polio started. Polio started in the Philippines with a 3H, a Health, Hunger, and Humanity grant, back when it started. So anyway, we'll see how that all works out. We've got just a couple of minutes left. Let me look at the chat box here, John, and see.
Jeff, can you call on George Whitfield, make his comment live?
Yeah, George, you had a comment in the chat box. You want to go ahead?
Thank you. My comment is that I think Rotary should be beyond the point of where we're talking about diversity and inclusion and take the bold step and talk about being an anti-racist organization. And there's a difference between inclusion and diversity and being anti-racist. And I think that's what this is all about. This is what the people are in the streets about all over the world, not about inclusion. And who can better say that than white men and women of privilege? That's what Rotary really is or was and can be in some places. So that's my comment.
Thanks, George. So we've got a couple of minutes left. Anybody, don't even go to the chat box, just raise your hand or unmute. Anybody have any final questions for our CEO while we have him here? Bonnie, I don't know what you're doing. Are you exercising while we're talking, or are you just stretching your arm, or do you have a question? It's amazing, by the way, what on these Zoom calls, what you can see.
I didn't know you could see me. I am trying to exercise, yes.
Okay, well, we're glad we can help out with that.
I was going to say, Bonnie, you can get up and go to the bathroom. You don't need to wave your hand. You could just.
All right, well, listen.
John, while we've got John.
You haven't missed me. I've done that.
I'm wondering if we're trying to get together. It'd probably be a great time to have a summit meeting for all of our peace scholars from over the years to, whether, a virtual summit meeting would work great on how to address the issues that are going on with the, with the racism and the riots and everything else. We've got this brain trust. Why don't we bring them all together and see what they can come up with?
Thanks, Chris. Anybody with a final question for our CEO?
Where do I do it?
Just talk.
Yes, Jeff, I guess I've got one. It's Doug Blazy. A lot of things that were said by both Cecily and you and John resonated a lot with me. And I use a slightly different phrase, and I'm just curious where it fits into the Rotary lexicon at this point, which is civic engagement. If we are going to deal with both injustice, but also with global warming and climate change, which are enormous, enormous issues, we've got to figure out a way to talk to each other civilly and what would you say, consolidate, encourage different viewpoints to see if we can reach consensus. And it seems to me Rotary values are completely consistent with that. So I'm just wondering if that notion is something you and the board and others are thinking about, how we encourage broader dialogue, not just among Rotarians, but with that community, broader community.
Thanks, Doug. John, I'll take a shot at that, and if you want to finish up with it. Doug, I think that's what we've been doing for 115 years, frankly. Now, I'm not suggesting that we've gone as far as we can, but we have been a multicultural organization. We have crossed borders and boundaries since our inception. Our youth exchange program helps people with their cultural awareness. Now, I'm not saying that we've done as much as we can, but I think civic engagement is what we've been about since we started. John, you want to add into that at all?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And, at macro level, it started with, the UN and goes all the way down to, as you said, youth exchange and what we do in our 6 areas of focus. Our convening power has been quite extraordinary. And so it's really important. Not we just talk to ourselves, and we use that convening power and our deep community roots to really take this to a new level. In fact, I would say on a macro level, You know, the world needs Rotary now more than ever. You know, no question about it. I mean, in fact, our organization was built for moments like this, right? We have deep community roots in every community in the world almost. I mean, there's not I like to say there's not a politician in the world that doesn't have a Rotarian as a constituent. And so, you know, this in some ways, I know I'm big hockey, I love hockey, big fanatic. If you watch that movie Miracle on Ice, Herb Brooks is sending the U.S. team off to play the Soviets. And, you know, he gives that pep talk in the locker room, and, you know, sort of paraphrasing here, but he says, this is our moment. This is our moment. And I think that's true for Rotary as well. We're built for this moment. The world needs Rotary more than ever. This is our moment. I'm very confident that worldwide, as an organization, we're going to step up and do it and play our historic role here, whether it be COVID, whether it be dealing with racism, whether it be dealing with justice and inequality. This is our moment.
Well, and you know, if you look back, every program in Rotary, whether it's RILA, Youth Exchange, whatever it is, all started at the grassroots level and worked its way up. Very few of our projects, if any, and I can't think of one, started in Evanston and worked its way down. So whenever I get the question in my travels about, you know, what's Rotary going to do about this and what's Rotary going to do about that, it starts with you. It starts with you, and it starts with your club and with your community. And what are you going to do? And certainly we can provide tools and resources, and we do. But it really starts with you and with your club. All right, Russ, I know that we're overtime. And I hope John gets paid for that, because he is on overtime. John, we can't thank you enough for being here with us today. It's a Saturday morning. You're very kind to be here with us today. Can everybody give John our thanks? Thank you, my friend, and I'm sure I'll be talking to you soon.
Thanks so much for having me. Have a great assembly.
Thank you very much, John. I really appreciate you joining us today. It means a lot. You indirectly challenged me in Niagara Falls for my year this year, so I'm looking forward to making good on that challenge. So
All right.
thank you very much, and
Okay.
take care.
Thanks for having me. All the best.